Good evening, everybody. For those of you getting ready to charrette, it's fantastic you came down. This lecture got moved from Halloween for various reasons, and it was amazing that we were able to jump. It now runs right up against final reviews, but knowing Young-Ho Chang and his wife and partner, Li-Ja Liu, I think this will be a very inspiring lecture, so I feel like it's wonderfully timed. I want to thank our dean, Andres Hyake, for making this possible today. It was Wei-Ping Wu, our interim dean last spring, met with Young-Ho just casually and got to know each other a little bit, and Wei-Ping suggested that Young-Ho come to lecture. Andres became dean in the summer and then completed that transaction very nicely and very cordially, asked Galia Somanov, who is here somewhere, and myself to do a follow-up. This semester, the lectures I've attended, the questions that came out of the audience were amazing. I could quote them, and I actually intended to, but I heard at Emmanuel Admasu's lectures questions about myth and autobiography, which actually blew my mind. I texted Sanford Quinter, who's sitting here, that someone had brought up Dana Haraway during the Brown Labor. Dana Haraway was a major author in Sanford's book Incorporations. But so I think Galia probably do a better job than I about holding back and letting the questions come from the audience. But as a precursor, I wanted to take a minute to help introduce Young-Ho Chang. And this slide has been up for a moment, so we can actually move it. Young-Ho is a partner with his wife, Li-Ja, in Beijing-based practice. But has a history in academia, and architectural practice, that is not entirely uncommon, but is extraordinarily devoted to both sides. And over the years, full confession, I met Young-Ho in 1985 and have been great friends with him ever since. I don't like those personal kind of introductions for a public lecture, but here it's unavoidable. So, but I can say that having known Young-Ho all those years, we continually circle back to trying to understand the influences on us collectively, he and I together, Li-Ja, but also just on having spent so much time in architecture schools with the aspiration of practice. And I will say, very clearly that I think Young-Ho, despite prolific practice now for 30 years, is really still often sorting out what he thinks about things, even under this immense pressure of realizing them. And he's done this at Berkeley, at Rice, at MIT, where he served as chair and head, and as a visiting professor at all the major schools around the world. And he's continually doing this. He and I, you might call it nostalgia, I think it's better than that, but we go back and remember, what was Horst Riddle saying at Berkeley, and did we understand it? Or those Chris Alexander lectures, did we understand them, and should we go back to that? And so it's not nostalgia so much as really trying to sort out these influences. But I think when I introduced Young-Ho to Wei-Ping last spring, I suggested that this is somebody who I think is both at the cutting edge of practice, but nonetheless continually reflecting on education, and of course has had major roles in education. So I don't mean to make it seem as if he hasn't. The Young-Ho I know, I feel cliched to do this, but he did a project when he was fresh out of school based on Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window. And I was there. I saw the project happen, and that model is a picture today in on his bookcase in Manhattan. But one thing about the film, aside from the fact that it's architectural and ocular and perspectival and full of drama, and it's high art, and it's also popular media, all of these things are really in Young-Ho's lexicon, to go from post-structuralism to comedy. Hitchcock in some cases shows up, and in this one picture here, he shows up in the film. And aside from the fact that it's Hitchcock and Young-Ho has specific interest in that, I've often felt that what really made him timely and continues to make him timely, tonight hopefully we get into the new things, was that he was reflecting on being in and out of the scene. He's the author of the project and he's in the project. And I think, architecturally speaking, the last 30 years, we have all returned to this over and over again, post-structuralist questions about authorship and control and power versus critiquing having said authority, and meanwhile having to find the agency to build. When Young-Ho returned to Beijing in 1995, I guess full-time, was back and forth, but really I thought of Young Ho, and I think most people thought of Young Ho as somebody who was quite happy drawing. This is one of his drawings from the later years in Berkeley. He later built this. But a kind of exquisite practice of drawing paper architecture, and one wasn't entirely sure that it wouldn't stay there. I've kind of stayed there more than I should have. But Young Ho returned to Beijing. The first project was a bookstore where the bookcases moved on a bicycle wheel. And this kind of mix of like the cerebral and the popular, the vernacular and the heady. I think a more menacing project, perhaps the third police station. I always thought of this as a kind of Duchampian bicycle wheel, but I won't go into that now. Young Ho can resort to ways to describe his work as straight out of his life as a young child and young man in China before he came to the US as a result of the Cultural Revolution, landing at Ball State University in Indiana, and then later Berkeley. But here, a project in a journal that Steve Hall, myself, Yehuda Safran, and Andrew McNair created and edited, Commitment to Dim Sum. There's a humor there, but a seriousness. This was 32, one of the many things Young Ho has worked on in the States over the years. I think we did 13 issues, largely on computers at Stephen's office. It got more rigorous when we had an editorial help from Daniela Fabricius. Sanford might know that. But then on the other end of it, the Young Ho that's harder for me to understand, even though I've known him for so long, is the Young Ho that does projects like this. And I can understand it literally, but tonight maybe we're going to be there more in the talk, and this little preamble is helpful or not. But this is not one building by Young Ho, but many. He did all of them. And Li Jia, I'm sure. Knowing Li Jia, I think that's probably very much Li Jia making that happen. There's also interspersed very innovative work around material. Young Ho warns people all the time to not lose sight of architecture in the face of big urban questions. This was work putting concrete into fiberglass tubes and using, I guess while you were chair at MIT, using maybe MIT demanded research from you, but actually realizing that. The Young Ho, I most recently really watched in a lecture. I've seen several in the last few years, but back in 2013, I was in Shanghai and attended a lecture. You must have had 1,000 people listening at an auditorium on the Huangpu River, part of a project we were all involved in, and you showed Siegfried Leverance and urgently told 1,000 young architecture students that they should not lose sight of the small. And this was contextualized in the massive urbanization of China 30 years into that, and maybe that will come up tonight. I'm assuming you learned about Siegfried Leverance from Lars Larup or Stanley Sadowitz at Berkeley, two immensely influential professors, very gifted designers, but people that set a milieu that I think Young Ho had gained immense amount from, as did I, and of course many. Returning to China, well-known project, the Split House, purposely shown only vaguely here, but it shows in a model. This is rammed earth construction. What isn't obvious, and maybe we'll see it tonight, is that it's kind of at the bottom of a giant hill, like a dam. And as much as it's a vernacular and serious work about place, it's also precarious. And I think, like much of the work we're going to see, is saying, yes, I'm in practice, but I'm not normal. And that's, in fact, part of the name of the company. So this is not intended to be followed, but Young Ho graduated from Ball State University. Later got he already had pretty much a degree in architecture from China. His father was the architect for the museum on the Tiananmen Square. But after the Cultural Revolution, he and his brother came to the United States, landed at Ball State, then Berkeley. In questions, I might bring some of these things up, but the School of Architecture at Berkeley was founded in 1959 there in red. It was only a few years later that the world came undone in the 60s, and Berkeley really kind of perhaps followed suit. But in that aftermath, that school, which is a school I dearly love, was really pluralistic and diverse, and to get through it, you really could tap into unbelievable professors, but you had to build some identity for yourself. A lot of that happened by going over to Bill Stout Books, where the books were expensive, but you could read them. And Steve Hall worked at Bill Stout Books just as a young man. Just prior to moving back to China, Young Ho taught at Rice. His home is there at the Red Arrow. It was about 4 doors down from the Chinese consulate. So maybe we should have seen it coming, that he wasn't going to stay at Rice much longer. And he took off. So I asked him today for something personal. This is Young Ho skating at Michigan, and that is Lisan Couture in the front. So he does know how to have fun. And at the end of the semester, I thought it was worthwhile showing some of that. So that makes it possible for my questions really to be already queued up. But this is somebody who's got 3.5 decades of experience across building and teaching. Where to begin with a career like that? We'll now leave it up to Young Ho to tell us what he wants to do in this room. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. Now that you did the lecture, maybe I should introduce you. But anyway, I'll have some slides, and I'll pick up the conversation you started, and then maybe evolve into a discussion of something I'm really focusing on today. Anyway, so you see a peculiar graphic design that, what should I use to click? Yeah, that on the keyboard. Okay, yeah. So what you see here is not for today. I thought I wanted to show you because that would make a point. If we did a lecture on the original date, which is a Halloween night, of course. But the point I like to make is that, so what you see here is not form follows function, but rather the other way around. Is function, or rather content, follows form, which is something I'll talk shortly. And then, of course, we are back to normal, so you see the title again. So where I like to start, I already mentioned, is this very important slogan suggested by the American architect Louis Sullivan. However, today I would ask this question. Let me show you why that question is relevant, perhaps even important. So first of all, I like to define the word form, because I'm not only using the definition of form as what you'll find in Oxford English Dictionary, which is figure, shape, appearance, and also could be a structure, system, and organization. I'm defining it according to the traditional Chinese poem, which is discipline. There's one word we use in Chinese, is lü. Literally, it means discipline. So what it means is that it's a set of rules you set up for a poem to be poem. So here you see, so there are 4 lines, of course, and each line has 5 characters. And then beyond that, the pitch of every single character, there are 4 of them, is dictated. You can't pick a word with the wrong pitch. And then it rhymes. So I'm going to read it in Chinese just for giving you a little flavor how it sounds. So, 文性才为良，相毛结为羽，不知动理云，去作人间语. What the poem talked about in translation, as you can see directly, actually is about the building of a building. So imagine if we talk about it, we meaning architects, it could be done all in very everyday language or professional jargons. But only when you have this set of rules, the lü, or form rather, the form enables words become poetry. And then the question I have is that, would a form enable building to be architecture? So we'll find out. So this is an image probably you have seen hundreds of times, thousands of times. You're probably pretty tired of. But anyway, so what I like to suggest is that it's a question, so what is the form of a glass house? We may think about glass, the material, we may think about the steel frame for the Farnsworth house. They are all pretty important, but the most important thing is transparency. Because of transparency, the house has to be extroverted towards outside as well as inside. So a glass house by nature cannot have rooms because anything in the middle would block transparency. And of course, Mies didn't have rooms, or rather almost didn't have any rooms. There is a core with 2 bathrooms and a mechanical room. I would imagine Mies probably hated its existence, but had to have it. It's a compromise. And then for Philip Johnson, the same story. It's open both to the outside and to the inside. Of course, no rooms. It's a 1-room building, and with a cylindrical form or shape for a bathroom. And that bit of obstruction to transparency, the bathroom, probably Johnson didn't want it anyway either. So what is a glass house? If I could diagram it, would it be pure, or rather an absolutely pure space? So that makes a glass house a glass house. The dotted line is an area we again, architects, we don't want it probably, but we have to have it. So without it would be the true essence of a glass house. And then a glass house with 4 rooms is an oxymoron. It doesn't make sense because you can't have rooms, or really. So that's, again, something. So Michael already introduced the vertical glass house. That was one of the glass houses I designed while I was teaching at Berkeley in 1991. And I didn't have a client, I didn't have a site, I didn't have an office. But I was thinking of glass house at that time already. In this case, I wonder how a glass house could be urban, because Farnsworth and Johnson's house, they were in beautiful landscape. So the transparency is horizontal. It's possible that the house would be very open, yet wouldn't have problem with privacy. And then in the city, I think because there are going to be neighbors, there are going to be density, so that the glass house may need to go the other way. So here you see 4 floors. From the left is a basement level. There's a heater and also the plumbing. What Michael didn't know, he didn't know everything, right? He sounds like he knows everything. Actually, school didn't teach me how to draw the plumbing right. So I went down to Ace Hardware store, picked up a book, not William Stott's, but Ace Hardware, which taught me how to draw correctly all the hardwares. Anyway, so the second drawing from the left is the ground floor. So you enter from that floor, and then that's where you get the facilities such as the bathtub and toilet and so on. And further moving up is the floor with furniture. And then on the top level It's a double height space where a person could meditate and so on. So it's the more spiritual space in the house. That was in 1991. And then you saw that drawing. What's interesting was that I didn't realize, actually I was putting rooms inside the house, of course vertically. So the basement is one room, and then there's a bathroom, there is a furniture room, and there is an empty room. So it's a glass house with rooms. And it looks like this from the outside, and then the inside. So who's a client? I imagined a 3rd century Chinese poet and thinker, his name is Liu Ling, to be my client. The reason was that he was so poor that when he came home every time, he would take off the only clothes he had, a robe, and put it on side to stay naked. And then he famously said when he had a visitor questioned his nudity, and he said, "The sky and the earth is my house, and then this piece of architecture is my clothes. So why should I wear anything?" So very philosophical. And then our photographer, he was really inspired by the story. Then so he posed naked here. Both figures are our photographer. And then you see him later on in all of our projects, naked, of course. And then, of course, I'm challenging the oxymoron. Why can't a glass house have rooms? Is there a way, rather, to really create a glass house with rooms? So I tried again. This time, I was interested in putting a cruciform, double-layered glass wall inside of a house so that a glass house would have 4 rooms. This is the initial drawings I made again in 91. I don't draw like this anymore. I don't have time. It's very time consuming. Maybe that's just an excuse. But anyway, so at that time, I was still thinking the living room should be bigger, the bathroom the smallest, and so on. But later on, I realized they could be all have the same size. And also, I realized Mr. Johnson had problem turning the corner for his house with the I column in the glass. So the corner, I didn't point that out, I'm sorry, but the corner I column is half exposed to the outside, half covered by the glass. So maybe I could have solved that problem on the way too, is to pull the structure back into the house in the form of 4 pieces of load-bearing walls. Meanwhile, enclose the glass house with a garden or courtyard wall, so that a glass house in some way is also introverted rather than purely extroverted. So I did all these moves, and then after 31 years, I drew the house initially, and it was built. I'll show it. And then the cruciform shape is important only in such a way. This is an exhibition we did. This rangefinders is part of the installation. And when you see the cross, actually it's about aiming onto a mark, of course, of a cruciform shape. As you see here, it doesn't have any religious connotations, but still people may think, hey, there is something holy. So we try to photograph it a different way. But it appears to say no. So anyway, it's really about an experience. You see 4 spaces, which I was on the construction site. A kid all of a sudden showed up. So it's about these kind of visual connections, and then it could happen inside. So that's from last week. And the house is pretty much done, and the furnitures are not in. And then so you can see the 4 rooms. They're of the same shape, of course, size. Visually, it's still one building, and yet they are rooms. So I was probably a little bit like solving a mathematical problem and say, let's try to solve this oxymoron. And then when you look down to the ground level, it's all laboratories, but don't also be misled by me. Lab here meaning this kind of research, cooking, for instance. So it's a lab for making food. And then here you see the load-bearing wall is pushed in so that you can see a perfect glass corner. And then here you see, again, the bathroom. For privacy, we decided to have curtains. So when needed, you can close the bathroom up. And that's the outside. The glass house is on top level. Again, the laboratories downstairs. And then on the right is a staircase to go up to the house, to the residential part. So anyway, what's interesting for me is that after all this effort to imagine this quarter space and so on, and I did do a diagram, which is totally unnecessary because that diagram existed since at least the beginning of 19th century. It's waiting for some architects to really use it. So from the first column from the left, the 4th one is right there. And then, of course, you'll probably find Mr. John Haydak's favorite diagram is up there too. With a it's the second row, the third one, the second one from the top. So anyway, so in fact, from that period, of course, this is in France, so this diagram got a different name, which is partie. They are not meant to be anything stylistic, but rather like the form of the Chinese poetry. It's a set of rules you can take, you can select and use. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. That's some kind of intelligence, often that today we forget. We like to think that we could start a design from nothing. It's sort of a mental tabula rasa. But actually, there's so much there already we could explore and take advantage. So I'm going to talk about one I used before I knew the drawing. So now I'm smarter. I can go into the drawing and look around. It's the second one. The first one on the second row. I called that one triptych. Triptych is a box with drawing inside. Now in the church, you open up like that. So it's something like this. So I actually, you're gonna see 2 versions. One is later, but it got built earlier. So there's an analytical set of plans, which is an exploration of what this triptych plan may do. And we ended up building the one on the right, the lowest one on the right. And then by doing so, it's not only a formal gesture for the sake of doing it, but rather to keep the trees in its place. And then, of course, creating a courtyard. And Michael mentioned something maybe I should explain. So he saw the house as a dam because the water would run down the slope, of course, and then passing through the house. I made the glass in the entry lobby transparent so that actually you can even see the water going through the house. So conceptually, it is very much like a dam. And then, of course, this is the older version, and now is finishing up the triptych house for a scholar. So I had two imagined clients. It's not very interesting. It's a scholar and a visual artist. Probably the roles or rather the people I admire very much. So here you work on one side, which is on the right-hand side. I'm sorry, on the left-hand side for you. And then on the right-hand side is where you live. And then in the middle, this is from the outside. So in the middle is a court. And then there are two inverted porches on the ground level, so that actually there is a hidden cross in this case. So you see one space, which is the court in the middle, with of course, a little island in the middle, goes one direction, and perpendicularly, and then you see the porches making the cross that way. So anyway, the building in the back, I'm sorry that you don't see the entirety of it. It's actually a beautiful art museum by Alvaro Siza, the dark building. So, and this is downstairs, again, a kitchen. And then you go upstairs and you into the living room. And then, of course, you have to go down and cross the courtyard to go into a very classic or even classical library. It's dark with eventually a lot of books. So the idea is that the life of the scholar gets reorganized a little bit. And then you need to experience outdoor, and you need to really compare the differences of these two spaces, which structures the daily life of a scholar. And then the third one is for a visual artist. It's the one with something poking out on the wall. That's the end of a beam. So this is the beam house, you may say. And then you see the beam comes in and goes through the entire studio. And then this is in the studio. And then actually the beam is walkable. So one can walk on top of the beam to look at her work or his work, be it sculpture or a big painting on the wall. So like that. And then look out onto the landscape. And then on one side of this, again, cruciform beam, where you stand is where the staircase is. And then you cross the entire length of the beam to reach your little study. And then if you take the staircase and then you go upstairs, there is a terrace. And on your left-hand side, and there is the kitchen and dining. So you can have friends over and have a party on the roof terrace, like that. And the last one is a house with an inverted roof. And this one also opens to the little town square in the middle, like that. So basically, you see a studio side, and then on the other side, there is a mezzanine, which is the living quarters. So basically, the beam or the roof, they started again to suggest a different ways of living. So in the end, it's not so much having an idea of how to live and then you design this particular space or this piece of architecture. Rather, you have the idea of the space, of the architecture first, and then started to imagine how to really live there and work there. And then you see our dear photographer again. And this is it's through that door, by the way, right there. You go in. I bet he probably actually took a shower. But anyway. So 4 parties, from the aerial photo you can tell, and then 4 pieces of architecture, 4 different ways of living. So form follows function, or function follows form. It's still a question, and however, let me take you one step further. It's a different notion. So let's say nobody follows anyone, but rather could form creates content. Still doing diagrams of parties. This one, again, back to a quarter square. However, I turned the cross in the middle 45 degrees, cut out the central portion of the space. So it's not going to be 4 triangular room, but rather a courtyard house. And this is a traditional courtyard house in Beijing, and it's pretty much similar to the one I grew up in. And today, if we look at it, the cultural value of it is undeniable and unquestionable. However, as far as life in there, and we have some issues. One is that when you go from one room to another, you always go through the courtyard. It's not the most convenient. And it rains, as we all know, it's too cold or too warm, and so on, so that it really would make the everyday life a little inconvenient. And then when we open the door, either in the winter or in the summer, you lose energy. That wouldn't be the way we think about how a house should be organized in terms of the issue of energy. So we thought for a small site, the house might be like this one. First of all, we of course have the courtyard in the middle in a decent size. The size of spaces in architecture, of course, is super important. The traditional house typically is 10 meter by 10 meter. And then this is a small lot, so we could have it 6 meters by 7 meters. It's a little smaller, but not too small. So at the expense of the depth of the room. So we decided the only way to make the house work, again, is to imagine a different lifestyle. In this case, is to live around the clock. So in the morning, you're on the west side. So you have breakfast there, the morning sun will come in. And then with the sun, you move to the north. Then in the afternoon, you're on the eastern side. You're having more sunlight. And then in the evening, and you have the dining space on the south. It's darker and you can entertain friends. So basically, the whole idea here is making a loop of a space, or rather living space. Just again, it's not only a one space house. You heard that term when I talk about the glass house. And I would like to suggest this is a glass house. So you'll see. This is the house from the outside. If the facade means mask, here you'll see truly a mask. And then once you go in, it's like this. It is a traditional courtyard house, you may say still, but yet if you look at the continuous glass elevation around the courtyard, you may realize this is the Farnsworth house turned totally inward. So it's a glass house within a more traditional house. And that's once you enter that facade from a hutong, an alleyway, and then you go through this space, and then you are in this looping living space. And then in the morning, and then the west side, and you're going around with the lights to the north and to the east, and then in the evening. So you're looking at the southern wing of the house. And there are things we didn't or couldn't possibly program. So when I'm saying that we like to imagine lifestyle, it's really a suggestion or an invitation to our clients. Would you like to try to live in a certain way? And in this case, our best clients, not the parents, but the kids, they love the house. That's what they do. There are two boys and a girl. They love to run around the courtyard inside. Of course, this is one evening. You see the kids running, the parents either cooking or entertaining some guests who are the architects, as you can see here. And then because of the structure we designed, we ended up with some very strange details. We're still trying to digest if there's something else could be done, but you see the traditional tiles, and then the steel structure would create such a corner together. So here again, designing the space of the house and the act of programming the spaces are two acts of design actually very much merged together. So here I'd like to jump into a particular problem of these kind of spatial diagrams or parties. This one, I don't know if it's really just called aggregation. Oh, I missed an R there. I'm sorry. Anyway, see, the problem of aggregation is pretty straightforward. So you have the repetition of one standard unit. And it's a diagram on the top left. And you have the idea. And then, of course, with the number of repetitions, in any case, you would need a circulation space. So you may have a double-loaded corridor, as on your upper right-hand corner, and then you go down is the double-loaded corridor. Double-loaded corridor sounds like something generic. For the students, you may not realize because its popularity rather, it actually has dominated architecture and our life collectively for centuries. It's no joke someone would have born in a hospital with double-loaded corridor and then went to kindergarten, elementary school, high school, college, or in a double-loaded corridor building. And then you end up working in an office during the day in a double-loaded corridor building and went home for a double-loaded corridor apartment. It's a sad life. We for years now, it's not easy. We put up a fight with this particular party, if I may say. And then I personally had the luck to experience maybe the best double-loaded corridor building in the world, which is in Trieste, Italy. Is the center for pure theoretical physics. And in the department for mathematics is this diagram, the lower left one. So the rooms are tiny for the mathematicians, probably no bigger than the lantern. Yet the corridor became this huge open public space. So there are cafe, there are ping pong table, there are all the things. So I think the idea is very powerful. When you have this tiny little personal space, you have to be in the public space. And then, of course, subverted altogether the notion of a double-loaded corridor. So the project I like to show is the Maison de la Chine, the China house in Paris. We won the competition, and then I gave you a little bit of history. So about 100 years ago, 1920, so it's 102 years ago, the Parisian government wanted to create some places for students to live. Otherwise, as you know, the left bank, there's only universities and research institutions and so on. You have to rent like any person in Paris, actually compete with them to get a place to live. So, and then again, the Parisian government invited all countries in the world to build a dormitory for their students and other students. The deal is that you build the building, you give to Paris as a gift, and you can have 70% of the rooms for the students from your own country and 30 from all over and from France, even from Paris. And then, so our side is over on the upper right-hand corner. And then in the 1930s, there was a Chinese architecture student in Paris for his graduation project. He imagined a house for Chinese students. His name is Yu Binglie, and he is long gone, and he had a rather short life. So there are a lot of unanswered questions. One of them, why he imagined a dormitory that big. It's 300 rooms. And then the famous Swiss house by Corbeau, 45 rooms. Okay, Swiss. Our Switzerland still is a smaller country. But anyway, it's interesting that he organized possibly, well, it's probably not very interesting. So For me, the problem is the double-loaded corridor, you can imagine in this building. And then, meanwhile, Corbeau did single-loaded corridor, so that not only in the rooms, there's going to be sunlight and view, even in the corridor, there's light, air, and view. Because Corbeau's concern is very contemporary. He was thinking of the health of the residents. So I thought maybe we should really take on that clue, which is a healthy life for the students. And then this is again is single-loaded corridor, but made literally into a loop. So put those two, put Corbeau and it's called Earth Building Tulou in Chinese together. So I did a sketch like that. And that kind of a strange shape actually is, that's a photo of the model. And then it's from the site. Because actually in the original site, that whole area you see were for sports facilities. There's a soccer field and basketball courts and so on. And then in order to be able to accommodate more countries, they actually pushed the sports field up and then created 3 lots. And then there's a new Tunisian pavilion next to the Chinese pavilion and a Francophone pavilion, altogether 3 new buildings. So it's kind of a difficult shape really to accommodate the building. Interestingly, what we got from our client is a number of rooms, 300. So after all these years, we back to 300 rooms. And then what you can see is that it got to be, because it's a single-loaded corridor, it got to be a little taller building, 8 stories. But we created a garden in the middle. So when the people move around, in this case, it's around this garden. And then everyone, all the students would look out. And then, were we happy with the single-loaded corridor? Not exactly, because the repetition would make a building not as lively, perhaps. It's a simple, formal problem. So we decided to use the exterior wall to create a rhythm. So it looks like this. That's like a week ago. We were on the construction site. And then meanwhile, we had to give identity to, or rather cultural identity to this building. In the early days, the Japanese pavilion would have a traditional pitch, curvilinear roof, and so on. But we thought maybe we could use the craft of making the building as the message for cultural identity. So we used the brick. It's not from China. That was the idea, but it turned out to be very complicated. And then we picked a French brick. This is not the French brick. This is the Chinese brick. We were learning from the different ways of laying brick from the traditional Chinese buildings. And then this is the southern facade facing the periphery. If you are familiar with Paris, it's the ring road. This is the southeast corner of periphery. So that's the facade. And then this is a very traditional way of making a cantilever in China. In Chinese, it's called 叠色. And that's what you see there. And then inside the courtyard or garden, And then there's a staircase would take you all the way to the rooftop. Since 2008, around 08, 09, President Sarkozy had a Grand Paris plan, and then pretty much demanded all the public buildings should have the rooftop open as for landscape. And then, of course, we obliged. And then here you can see the Eiffel Tower far away. So anyway, that's that. And then I'm getting into something, for me, it's probably very important, is how the content in this case could interact with form, so that form and content are both created at the same time. We had a project to design an art museum for the first abstract painter in China. His name is Wu Dayu. Most people in China probably don't know the name at all. He, since 1950s, he lost his job as a teacher, as a professor. So he taught at the China Academy of Art today in Hangzhou. And he went home and stayed in his tiny little attic, about 10 square meters, and did paintings of this size, postcard size, thousands of them. And this is one of them. And so an art dealer decided to build an art museum for him. Eventually, it didn't work out. So now we call the museum the No Name Art Museum. But actually, it was for him. And he was also a poet. These poets, it may look similar to the one I showed at the very beginning, but actually this is a classical / modern poem. Although the lines are consistent, and you see a number of words, actually 7 characters, also typical to classical poems, but yet this poem is very different. There's no rhymes, and there's no this kind of a dictation of pitches. And then the content is really about an experience in architecture, or I guess the word architecture didn't show up anywhere. So it's about the interaction between shadow and figure, time and space, and about the poet himself moving without a sound. And then, of course, as he said, he's in and out, this contradiction, darkness of the light. I was very much inspired. And then I saw the limitation of diagram of space. I decided to try to diagram time for a change. And this is based on a French philosopher, Francois Julien's book on time. The book is about a comparison of Eastern time and Western time. So on top is the Western time, is according to, I'm paraphrasing Julien here. So the idea is the observer of time is outside of time. So he's looking at the beginning and the end of time. And then time can be evenly divided. It goes to one direction. So it's objective time. But what's interesting about this objective time is that there's past, there's future, and there's no present. Western philosophers trying to solve that problem now for centuries. But anyway, no, there are some possibilities, but we leave it there. And the Chinese time, or Eastern time, according to Francois Julian, is the subjective time. So the observer is inside of the time. So you don't see the beginning and the end. And most importantly, that the person is moving towards time while time is coming towards you. So in this case, there's only present, no past, no future. It's very important for me. It's not if I agree with his philosophy or not. If time can be as subjective as Julian suggested, and there's a chance to design it. So the whole question is, actually both time and space. One is truly subjective. Actually, you can design it. So you don't always measure the space, you experience the space. It's as simple as that. So this is a traditional Chinese garden bridge. All this zigzagging is about enlarge the space because you spend more time crossing it. The water must be wider, and then so the space is bigger. Took that, we used a single point perspective as the device, which is like a wedge shape, and to organize the entire museum. So what do you see? Some in the plan, of course, you see the tapering happen this way, but also sometimes like that, and so on. And then the whole idea is not so much to make the museum bigger or smaller, but to say maybe in the end you realize both time and the space are immeasurable. You can't measure them. The measurements is itself just a tool, a device. So we use in an optimistic way, perhaps. So here is the same wall. It's longer on the left and probably shorter on the right because of the exaggeration of the perspective or the shortening of the perspective. And then I'll show you another space, the one on the right, that little wedge. So this is one direction, the other direction. Two distinctly different experiences. This one is meant to be a water court because the project was semi-abandoned, so they never did the landscape nor the interior. So it's like this for now. Here is how to let the passersby to look in that space. The wall is being lifted up. Another pond, which is not there. And then very much exaggerated perspective. More of that. And then the curvilinear space is meant to really disrupt this reading of a classical perspective, a triangular space inside of the gallery eventually, hopefully. And then the shallowest space, and then a transparent space made with clay tiles. The tea house. So anyway, here, what I'm suggesting is that the temporal and the spatial experience is the content. It's being designed, but not the practical needs of the spaces, so that designing that experience and of course the form are really the same act, just or rather the same coin of two sides. So anyway, and here is another art museum, and this time is the only time actually we were able to help the client to make a decision on the site selection. The client really didn't ask us to help him with that. He picked a nice big flat piece of land in the development zone outside of the old city. So when I saw it, I thought that why people should make an effort to go to see art. Some of these folks probably are not really exposed to art in their life much in the past. So maybe we should be more proactive. Let's bring the art into the city, to near where the population is. And then the client bought the idea. So in the center of the old city is a river. So our building, our museum should be a bridge. And then you can see the bridge allow the cultural facility to connect the fabric on both sides of the river. And this is the traditional covered bridge in China. The virtue of a covered bridge is very different from an open-air bridge. It's a place people would go there, older people to go there to meet with friends and play chess, and maybe the kids would go there and do something. So there are vendors in these bridges, sell little snacks and so on. So it's like a salon, like really a linear square. So we liked very much that idea. And then we reintroduce it here. Here you see the bridge as the architectural design goes. On the bottom, there's a steel bridge because the material actually was recommended by the Water Bureau. Steel would allow the maximum amount of flood water to go through, and the members of the steel would also cut the tree branches and so on to really make the flood not an issue. So the lowest point of the building already is above the 50-year watermark, flood mark. So anyway, so on the top is a concrete bridge and with a painting gallery inside. Between the two bridges is a great exhibition hall. It's like mostly three spaces in this bridge or building. So it looks like this. You see the steel bridge for pedestrians, and then the art museum on top. And this is the pedestrian bridge. So when people pass through it, and eventually, actually, I'll show you, people can stay if you want, and also can go up to the museum. So the question we had was that, what if people still don't go to the art museum? Is there any way to bring art closer? So what we decided to do is to have two huge skylights on the floor of the art museum. So if you look up, you'll see something you like, and then maybe next time you would go into the art museum. So that's that. Some folks on the bridge, the big exhibition hall, exhibition, a painting gallery, empty and full. And then there are two entrances to the art museum because it's a bridge. One side, the other side. and then go in from one side, there's elevation difference. So a staircase to take you into the painting gallery and then come back down from the staircase like that. So that's that. So that was about selecting the site first. Because of the site was suggested by the architects, we also helped the client to imagine how to program the bridge. Becomes a mixed-use bridge, passing of the bridge and then going into the art museum. Here is the last project I'd like to present. It's again fairly rare. It's getting less rare now, but that was the first time the client invited us to participate in programming the building in a particular way. Basically, the question, the president of this art university, China Academy of Art in Hangzhou, he said to the three finalists for the design competition, he said, "You all architects who teach on the side, could you help us to imagine the educational system of this campus?" And that's what I did. So I couldn't help but to put my experience teaching here in the US and some also in China, but also it's about my experience teaching architecture. So I made a number of suggestions here with this, again, a big diagram. So hands-on experience is very important for all students, not because you are studying art, even if you're studying something else, to use hands and the brain together, I thought was very important. And not to say that I learned that's the motto of MIT, actually. It's man's madness. But anyway, so in the early years, the first 2 years, so that becomes something important. And then what you learn, so you learn the typical drawing, that's fine, and maybe programming with using your computer, also important. But every student should learn architecture. Architecture is part of the general education at this campus. So I was fantasizing, because who knows if we're going to win or lose the competition. So, I may as well. So anyway, and then for the upper years, it's all about structuring the learning and teaching of courses around research topics. And then because it's so much about making, not only just reading or writing, the students should live upstairs of the studio so they can come down in the middle of the night to work on their projects and go up to take a nap whenever they want. And then within the dormitories, students can organize hobby clubs by themselves as courses, because they may realize a course they're interested in but not offered by the school, and then they would somehow organize and make it into a course and earn credits as well, so on and so forth. And we did win the competition. So that was our design of the campus. So there is a mat building for studios, covering as much as possible the land. So of course it's a piece of wetland, and then you see the water being kept. And then I couldn't help to diagram the experience of going through the studio. And this is a photograph showing, if you look in one of the bays of the studio, you turn right and you turn left. So that would be the experience. Here is a section, so you see the studio all the way across the entire campus. And that's the first stage when it's completed. Inside of the studios, you see the number of bays and number of layers. And then a typical bay would look like this. North-facing windows, very traditional. And on the outside. On the second floor roof, there's a whole pedestrian circulation system. The courtyards. So we also thought about, since we programmed this space, so we better think more about the folks who are actually trying to design this building for what they were, what's their transportation, and so on. And then students in 1935, they dressed up like that. And then some are American architects. They dressed like Maybach. By the way, the wizard designed that robe himself. That's what I heard. That's true, right? And Richardson was not as inventive to just put on a big monk robe. But anyway, so that's that. That project now is being kind of a slow one. Yeah, we're gonna pick up and do it, and then so they probably would have these kind of vehicles all on foot. And here is the reality of these kids. In the dormitory, and every other floor of the dormitory, there's a big public space. And then hobby clubs. Now there are altogether 12. This is the very first one. Yes, the archery club. Every student has to study architecture. So there are so many students, so they collectively make a model of the campus. They are designing the way they would engage, they would own the campus. Normal, traditional classes, studio for work and for exhibition is constantly rotating. More formal exhibitions by the end of semester, and continue in the studio. And then, of course, we didn't expect some badminton going on in there. Because of the height, it worked out very, very well. And then stage performance, film, and then on the outside of the studios, and they are places for people, again, to have life. They may take a cigarette and or just look at their iPhones and so on. So between the outside and inside, not only there is a semi-covered space, but rather places, again, for some people events to unfold. And inside of the dormitory, because the lower level are fully connected with studio, so you can see all their work and the chaotic condition of the studio started to invade into the dormitory, which of course is perfectly all right. So at this campus, the first class starts at 8:30 in the morning. So students now get up at 8:15. And they just go downstairs, that's it. And what about a few things, but what about breakfast? Oh, maybe I should tell you, see, this kind of a pretty clean facade actually is a mask again. Because in China, typically, students wouldn't use a dryer, they use washer. So they like to put up their laundries up in the balcony. So here you see. Okay, so wash clothes is one issue, and then breakfast, back to breakfast. So that's what now they have. So they don't have time for the canteen. So their vendors set up breakfast right outside the studio. So on their way, they can pick up, in Chinese, it's shaobing. It's like a breakfast pancake, and then just go in it and eat. And then students also take on our building in a number of ways. And this is, they turned our building back into a line drawing by doing projection and projecting whatever. The best one, or rather my favorite, is the next one. So I hope they will realize it sooner or later. I guess I'm suggesting that when you do architecture a certain way, you may help them to open up to some possibilities. So now the second stage is in full swing, should be done next year, before September for sure. And then back to the beginning of the talk. So what about party? What about form and content and so on? It's an ongoing investigation. So this building here, we started with the structure. So it's sort of like paper fan shape. Actually, because I do a lot of really boxy, rectangular, square buildings, and then my partner really doesn't like the idea, and she suggested we be a little more adventurous. So I obliged. And now for the spatial organization here, it is rather, maybe I shouldn't say organization, it's a disorganization of the space. So basically we turn the building in such a way that there are three connected spaces looking out in different directions. So what is the program for this space? From the name, you will get an idea. This building is called Faculty Student Activity Center. So they don't, our clients don't have a clue yet how to use it. And then with this university, also you may want to know that we used only half of the typical budget of a campus in China. It's 4,000 RMB per square meter. Why so low? Because the university, when they budgeted the project, they made a mistake. They couldn't change. So we had to work with it. So anyway, so here you can see the possibility maybe for a new space. It was somehow may be dictated by the structure, and then it would also lead to a new program. So the connection of the two projects and the content and form at this moment is where it is. Thank you. Okay, sure. And yes, yes.
Yeah, is that good?
You in the center. We are
So maybe do you want to be? You should be in the center.
You're in the center.
You're in the center.
Okay.
Whenever I take a seat like this, I think of Gropius's Total Theater, rather than this frontality. Thank you. Can we jump right in?
Oh yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, was it too long? It probably was.
It was too long. No, it wasn't. I was too long. It was perfect. Stefan, who is one of the associate deans here, who administers events, was encouraging me to make sure we left enough time. So there isn't that much time. Maybe I'll ask one question and hand it over, and then quickly get to the audience. There's so many people here who know Young Ho and Li Jia, but also, like I say, the student questions have been amazing. Young Ho, I'm trying to figure out how to. You're very disarming, and I say that as both like somebody who just, first time I've heard you give a full lecture at GSAP. I think it's the first time you've ever done that. You've been on panels here before, but he's never had the room like this before, and I'm thinking of some of the lectures this semester have been like that. They're kind of old-fashioned, frankly, in an era of panels more than full-blown lectures. So you've had time to kind of build something up there. As a friend and colleague, you are disarming in the sense that you often seem to be having so much fun and delight that it's hard to then want to kind of go back to the critique side. But earlier today, while I was texting Young Ho and asking, is this accurate? I asked, I said, you did read Roland Barthes carefully, right? And I'm assuming Death of the Author, people in the room probably don't know this work, but you wrote back saying, yes, absolutely, and it was a big influence. So I don't need to bring up Roland Barthes to do this, but as you progress through this today, I don't know what the audience saw, but I was thinking you go through form and content, and you take us back to like elemental aspects of being in school and show us they're not so elemental at all. You mentioned at one point, you said, if we work this out, we might have a chance to design something. You didn't mean professionally. You meant that there might be enough intellectual work done or insight or creativity that there's something new to do. Like you earn this possibility to do something. And you often disaggregated that from the client. You, in fact, said, I imagine the client, even when you had a real client. And when I was young, somebody told me Mises' client was philosophy, and I went, whoa. But you reminded me of that today. But when you got to the part where you decided you were designing the time and the space, and the one passage was, the building doesn't effectively know the person is there. They don't make a sound or a trace. And at that point, you were describing Eastern and Western time. I'm thinking of Sanford, who spent so much time trying to take us there at Rice. But without me acting like a scholar of those issues, even though I care about them, what was on my mind often was, is there a point where you really move into abstraction? And I'm thinking quite literally, Alfred Barr in the show at MoMA that I think inaugurated MoMA, he described Malevich as more abstract than Kandinsky.
Yes.
And Frank Stella will say, well, Kandinsky is more abstract, and he literally says it, Kandinsky is more abstract than Cezanne, and he shows you why. So in your case, when the students drew on your building there, and they were sort of re-abstracting it back, but not to sound critical, they gave us a good view of the very thick concrete floor. Right. So is Li Jia also demanding that your floors get thinner or that your building can get more abstract? I also kept thinking of Giacometti, the Palace at 3 a.m., that you're putting a person into the building and you're trying to get the building in effect to disappear, but you're also demanding that the syntax and structure of the building be dealt with. I mean, this is like an old-fashioned conversation, but I think he kind of
Because
demanded.
I'm old-fashioned.
Well, but you're building modern China, so you're hardly old-fashioned. So, yeah.
For your question,
But abstraction is the big question.
Yes.
And
it's,
that's it, yeah.
for me, it's an important question. I actually don't use that word that much in lectures, but I think a lot. And only once, a couple of years ago at GSD, Scott Cohen was a person all of a sudden mentioned, you like abstraction very much, don't you? Because it's not that easy to see. I think in my way of thinking, abstraction is very important. And the set of references, like Malevich for one, is always there. But yet, when that abstraction is being materialized into building, and then the tectonics of the building tend to take over. So it makes me think that it's not so much a white box would make an abstract building, but a well thought out, a clean kind of a set of relationships of a building maybe at this point for me would be the expression of abstraction. I'm not making much sense.
No, but just to add a fragment and then really give it maybe to Galia and the audience is, you also, I've always believed, but I see it more tonight, you spend a lot of time producing a quasi-theorem before you act. And you know, I don't know enough about this work. It's a long time ago and I was an architect, not a linguist, but the degree to which, you know, there was Noam Chomsky and George Lakoff at Berkeley, like all the work on not denying the presence of syntax, yet at the same time, of course, wanting to cause it to evaporate at times. That's where I'm going. And I feel as if you are kind of triggering this, I was thinking of the Haydock essay, Out of Time and Into Space from the 80s. The tension and compression may have therapeutic value to the docile, but the question remains, I'm pretty close to the accurate here, what happens when tension exceeds compression? Things kind of turn inside out, and he was discussing Carpenter Center. But so at Carpenter Center, the physicality isn't gone. The tension and compression he was describing as effectively kind of coming undone and flipping inside out. Anyway, I don't mean to take you through references that come from a different era, but my question would be, and this is not the right moment to do it, this insistence on the facts of architecture and then the role of the theorem, the imagination, and the exceeding of the limits. That was really there. And that moment of, I think, heading into saying you're designing the time and the space, no longer the form and the content. That's where I felt like you were heading. Okay.
Well, it was an amazing lecture. Thank you so much. A lot of very interesting and revealing moments of your architecture and your life. And so my question is, there are some students in the audience, and they probably have some of the questions that you had at some point. And what I would like you to tell us is, there was a moment where you were in the United States and you decided to go back to China and establish your firm. And you call your firm Atelier. And so would you tell us, I know that time comes at us rather than we go through time. So I am of the thought that we are always in the present. But can you tell us that moment where you made a decision to take one bifurcation on your life? Tell us a bit about that.
All right. Actually, it's very easy, but it's a pretty long story. So what happened was that I said some of the buildings I showed today were designed in 1991. I was at Berkeley. I wanted to have a tenure-track job. I didn't get it. So I was wondering what's going to happen next. But back in my mind, I wanted to do one thing because after already 8 years of doing paper architecture, I wanted to build. But I don't know, there's no way for me to have a client in the US. It seemed that way. And then Li Jia and I, we were traveling in Europe on a scholarship. And as for all the practical reasons, we ended up back in Beijing in spring 1993 for Chinese New Year. And then a friend of a relative of Li Jia came in and just to say hi. And he didn't really know what we do anyway, and he asked, and then we told him we're architects. And he said immediately, hey, you can design a building. And then we got our first project. It's in the city of Shantou. It was called an entertainment center, which was a casino, actually. What I'm telling you is that it's not entirely accidental. We started the practice we wanted to build, but it's quite incidental the way we started. And then we did a series of projects. None of them got built or went very far. And then I went to Houston to join Michael to teach at Rice, Sanford and Lindy. So anyway, and then after 3 years going back and forth between Houston and Beijing, we decided to practice full-time.
Fantastic.
That was a more serious, more informed decision. So I guess the question behind your question is that we would really do it if we know how hard it was? The answer probably is no. It was so hard. If we knew it was that hard, I'm probably just going to stay in the U.S., teach more or what. So, but anyway, and then whenever we wanted to give up, there's a little progress being made, little hope popped up and so on, and we just kept it going.
Fantastic.
It's not a question. In tonight's lectures, as much as I've known you a long time, it's the first time I saw, in a way, the theorizing or the theorems and the working it out in the head from Duran, for example. And
right.
When you said, and Hayduk did this one, I was thinking quarter house, half house, three-quarter. But I made the connection, assuming you might. Without that time, not building, it seems to me part of the way you have survived the intensity of building is by, in fact, being able to hold the values in as part of your imagination. And you said that over and over tonight. Yeah. I imagined. Right. And that to me was quite remarkable.
No, so, I appreciate the 80 years. If I didn't get the opportunity, I would go on somehow. But I already was anxious.
Yeah, that period of time, Massimo Scolari and Raymond Abraham and so many people who deeply valued working with an imagined proposition, which we know is Lebbeus Woods. And yes, exactly. So I hope we haven't killed the enthusiasm of your questions.
There's a hand.
Thank you, Professor Chang. It's an amazing lecture. I believe we're all very inspired. I have one question. I can see that in a lot of the projects that you proposed, it kind of have a minimum definition of utilization, so that allows for the reinterpretation and redefinition of your space that that function follows the form. So how do you imagine the potential or intention of kind of having a urban or a more massive scale of that adaptation when maybe the buildings or architecture has to have more definition of the usage?
That's actually a very interesting question, and I'll put it this way. First of all, so I talked about today that form may not follow function, or it could be the other way around, and so on. But what's interesting is that space and structure could be really an independent notion altogether. It doesn't really require a content to begin with. So in the past, when Sullivan had that slogan, he was referring specifically to the new modern industrial buildings. The form follows function, and the production of something would follow the workshop space. It probably did. I don't think I would say Sullivan got it wrong. But those spaces, because they're just open base, like the Liangzhu Xiaoyuan, the campus I showed, that they are open to other uses. So I think sometimes it's the space, sometimes the structure we design today should give the possibility of reuse a chance. So it doesn't matter what it is. So now a factory is turning into cultural facilities, housing, and so on and so forth. But it wasn't meant for that, but it is open big space. So typically today for housing, I believe that the housing units, the structural system is probably not the appropriate one because it makes the rooms are too close and too small. So that's another big story. There's a Dutch guy, his name Chang. He was also a chair of Department of Architecture at MIT before. What's his name? He did that. He actually invented a Habraken, yes. He invented the open building system. It's very, very interesting and relevant today. And so remember that John Habraken. Take a look.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. There's so much work that we see that you've created, which is really incredible to see in its trajectory. I think what's striking in the images of the architecture is something that's very visible, yet maybe not as visible unless you start to see it. And I think it really comes through in the materiality, right? So there's a lot of wood form concrete. There's a lot of specialized bricklaying. There's a lot of, handcrafted tiles, and all of these materials, which are very expressed, have a really high content of labor attached to each of the materials and how they're expressed. And there's a monumentality to all the architecture. I wonder if you could speak a little bit on your choices of how, in terms of making a design, how do you sort of decide how to coalesce the making of something to the expression of something in a very real and material and procedural way?
First of all, for ourselves as architects, the materiality is very important because today we live in two worlds. We live in the virtual worlds of technology as well as the old-fashioned tangible reality. So it's very important to think that architecture would have a reason to be around because as an architect, I have been asked, God knows how many times, why do we still need architecture because we have the virtual world? My answer is this: the tangible world can be different, and architecture can make it as a more intense experience. So the weight, the texture, the color, it goes on and should give us something very different than what we see on the computer screen, even maybe on virtual reality, a gargle or something. So from that particular standpoint, I think that architecture should not be just smooth like a thin surface. And then to work with the construction team is a different story. Since we have been practicing for almost 30 years, next year will be our 30th anniversary. And then I find that on one hand, it's very hard to convince the construction workers to learn. And a lot of them don't. But on the other hand, some can get really interested. And not only they learn, they become really or a partner in crime or something. We work together to maybe to improve upon, even invent certain things. So, and also sometimes the project manager for the client could be someone which would share our interests and even ideal. It's a long process, but after 30 years, we know some people now we can call them and ask them questions. How can we pour the concrete in a certain way, and then maybe questions about other materials and so on.
You're working with the building institutes still.
Oh, they are terrible.
You're on video. Okay. Okay.
They don't care much.
But I'm thinking of the project.
Yeah,
It was
no,
one project, but the concrete and the fiberglass
no,
too.
yeah, we work with the university on that.
And and there's much more to that. I assumed you wouldn't show it tonight, but that was used specifically looking at building techniques, systems,
Yeah.
embodied energy. Yeah.
Do you enjoy building? Do you like building?
Very much. That's the only reason to stay in architecture.
Right.
Yeah. When I go to a construction site, it's full of problems.
Right.
But I still
Love it.
yeah, exactly.
I can tell. Yeah. Yeah.
And working in the office every day is not as exciting, but to go to the construction site, different story. Let me want to say one thing. The design institutes we need to collaborate with all the time.
Yeah.
They are the hardest souls to get them inspired or interested. I don't know why, because somehow they are like just machines to produce
I don't mean to
drawing.
bring critique. I saw Stephen's linked hybrid drawings that preceded going to the Design Institute and came back. But maybe there's a conversation there. But I think Sanford Quinter had a question. Yeah.
So this is my second lecture that I've seen of yours. The first one was like the first weeks that we arrived in Texas together. And what I found fascinating was just how similar some of the things are that I saw today, but also how long it took me before I realized that. So the question I want to ask you, Michael sent us off into a kind of a meditation on abstraction, but what strikes me so strongly in your work, and which blew me away when I first saw your presentation in 1991, is Hitchcock. Yeah. And the rigor. When you showed us the square poem, the 5x4 characters, I realized that's what Hitchcock did in Rear Window. He set up a situation and he said, let's play it out. But what's fascinating about your work, and Michael invokes it when he talks about the humor, the joy, and also the perversity, is intimacy and, and witnessing. And the idea of always participating psychologically in places in the entire field. Like you're an eye, but somehow you're forced into an intimacy with other things. So I know you're fascinated by this stuff. Whether you speak about it or not, I don't know. After all these years, I don't know. But I think it would be great if you did tonight.
So are you suggesting that I'm not perverted enough?
Perverse is different. Every time I use that word, people get angry. Perverse just means, let's say dangerously playful.
Thank you. But the truth is, to make a presentation like tonight, in a year, a little more, and try to make sense of not all of our work, of course, but a great number of work together, it's actually a challenge. I kind of enjoy it, but it's not an opportunity to do psychoanalysis on the side as well. Maybe this is my conservatism.
Yes, it is.
So anyway,
Dan?
and then,
I have three brief questions.
oh, okay.
First one builds on that amazing question, because I saw that kind of Hitchcock in the subtext here. Hitchcock's, one of his main tropes is the MacGuffin, which is the object which everyone is looking for, which has no real importance, but sets the plot going. And I somehow feel that you find these MacGuffins and everything starts running on its own, but then you catch up with it. Second, that's the question about the MacGuffin. The second is, form follows function was not invented by Sullivan. It was invented by Horatio Greenough in 1856. And I believe...
Not Will LaDuke?
No, he's earlier. Greenough is a bit earlier.
Oh, okay.
If I'm not wrong, Ken, maybe you'll correct me. And I believe, but I'm fascinated by the idea that you're inverting this. But Greenough is an interesting figure because he seems to be a sculptor originally, if my memory serves me. So in a funny way, form following function for him, function would be something about the aesthetic as well as the living and the... So there's something very interesting going back in the genealogy of that. And the third thing that was sort of haunting this, besides the Hitchcock and the reversal of form follows function, for me was Louis Kahn, because you mentioned the immeasurable. And Louis Kahn said, we start with the immeasurable. We then, as architects, go to the measurable, and then we must get back to the immeasurable. That's what I feel about your work, even more than the reversal of the form function, and even more than the MacGuffin. What do you think?
I think you're pretty much right. Thank you.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
There's
Disarming.
yeah. Right next
Disarming.
to disarming.
And conservative.
Hello, Professor Chang. Give a little bit background about myself. I'm graduate student here from Columbia, and I come from China as well. And my boyfriend and I, now we are building like 7 floors, around 86 square meters, housing in Ho Chi Minh City right now. And sorry, I take a note. So like we are 2 young, like ambitious entrepreneurs, looking forward to build so many buildings that offer to young people can live in. We would like to build the affordable and small rooms offered to young people, such as college students, or the people who just entered to the working place in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. But we were struggling to find the samples. Like, do you have any architecture's works, examples that could recommend to us, like based on our situations? Thank you. It's too much. It's just like, I'm asking about like, do you have any work examples that could recommend to us? We can mirror ourselves to build like affordable housing. In,
Affordable housing.
Yes, in Vietnam. Yeah.
In Vietnam. I'm afraid I
Thank
don't
you.
know.
You can talk on the side, but if, I gather you're also looking for support for enthusiasm, which he would be terrific at, and yes.
Hi.
Housing is taught here at Columbia.
Yes. Yes.
So maybe you should take a course. It's a big subject, a very important one. Yeah. Yeah.
It was founded by Kenneth and Richard Plums. That's more like 40. Okay. No. Kenneth and Stephen know Young Ho quite well. Other quick, I think we have time for one or two more.
One more.
Hi.
Stefan will
No,
chide us.
she has
Yes.
a microphone already.
Yeah, just a quick question. So basically, the architecture for Liuling really kind of like impressed with me, because I know like for his time that he was kind of like retreated to bamboo groves in order to get away from the political disarray. And then also you were doing the scholar house, which you recognize that for maybe the literati today in China, they will have to condition themselves among two set of lives, the study room and the mundane life routine. This kind of like conflict between the two lifestyles. And then I guess as a future Chinese architect in the future, I wonder, how do you think we could condition our inner space with all the political conflicts outside? And also, I guess it's also very interesting to see how your house for Liuling was actually built with concrete that isolated the residents from the outside world, whereas Liuling was choose a bamboo grove that is actually in the natural setting. So I guess this nuance also really resonates with me. So yeah.
I guess what you're asking is if like certain materiality, certain spatial quality are perhaps more practical or more desirable. Actually, all I presented, they are not the only solution. You have to understand. So a house could be very open. You know, I'm into a glass house, but it could be partially open or entirely closed and so on. It depends on a number of things. View is one of the criteria, and also could a house open, again, like a vertical glass house, upward, and so on. For material, it's also about choices. For instance, actually, I like to get back to concrete. So we have thought about doing less concrete buildings for years now, but since concrete is the most available, cheapest, and mature technology, it's very hard not to use it. And then what do we do? So we tried the fiberglass studs a little bit and a number of other things. Now we're doing and also engineered wood and so on. However, the world is changing pretty fast. This year, it's about 2-3 months ago, have you ever heard of Nobel Prize? Not Nobel Prize. Nobel Prize is a prize given out by some institution in Denmark. This year, the winning, the prize is given to some young people who invented a way to extract carbon from the process of making cement. Now, that's fantastic news. All the things we have accumulated for the past 30 years, how to make concrete better, we can use it again without much guilt. So it doesn't mean that we're not going to try other stuff, but concrete is back on our list as a possibility. And so I think don't looking for, probably for both of you up there, don't look for a singular answer.
Right.
And yeah, look around and you'll find something not only is good for the world in one way or another, and you truly actually are interested in. I don't think one could do something just for the rightness of that thing, the correctness of that thing. You also have to love it. Probably that actually goes first. You love it, and then you also do the right thing. That would be a lot better.
So I'm going to look towards our dean. We're over time. Should we? Why don't we allow one more question? And I know there's more than that, but or if there are, maybe there isn't another question. There we go. Yes.
There's a.
Young Ho is also in town and coming to some reviews, so you will be able to talk to him in the hallways. So.
Thank you for the amazing lecture, and I will just ask a very short questions. So I saw you using Chinese poem and the metaphor of like the rhythm in a Chinese poem as to how to translate that into architecture. So my question is, in your perspective, how to create a rhythm in architecture and space? Thank you.
How to create
How to
what?
create rhythm in architecture and space? Because I saw you using Chinese poems and the rhythm of the poems as
Rhythm?
Reason. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say, because I saw a lot of Asian faces here, I think today every one of us is culturally a hybrid.
Right.
You have to accept that, because otherwise you're going to go back to at least 100 years to the 20th century, maybe even 19th century, because that's how we learn, how we grow up, and how we end up. So there is no, I think, a set way for you to say where to start a project. So for me, a lot of things I'm interested in, but I know so little, I wouldn't dare to talk about here at Columbia, in fear that there are a lot of people who know a lot more than I do. Because one of the examples is Bach's music. It's fugue. I listen to, my wife and I, we listen to Bach. Not every day, but at least every week. The miraculous thing is that Bach lived 300 years ago in Germany, worked in a church, had 10 kids. So, 21. Come on. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. What I'm suggesting is that I had my life is totally different, and I'm far away from that era, and the habitat Bach lived and worked. But that doesn't stop me to like Bach's music. So that's what's important. So that a particular poem, Wang Wei is a big poet in Tang Dynasty, as we all know. I tried very hard to like his poems, but I only like that one. Tell you the truth. It's not like I don't like poems, I do, but Wang Wei is not someone I love that much. But, that poem was about architecture, about making buildings, so it inspired me. And same thing for Wu Dayu. Most of his poems I read to search for something that could help me, but pretty much only that one did the trick, otherwise not. So that's the message. So you're Chinese, you're going to be exposed to a lot of Chinese culture. That's fantastic. And then you are here also, you're going to exposed to a lot of other cultures. What about the film culture? What about Hitchcock and so on? So be very open, and then you're going to have a very exciting life ahead.
Thank you very
I
much.
think that's a perfect
Thank you
closing.
very
And
much.